In times of universal deceit, truth is the only rebellion left. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion. Thanks for listening to today's show. Before we get started, remember that our sponsor for The Rebellion is a ministry called Equipping the Persecuted. The website is equippingthepersecuted.org. That's one word, equippingthepersecuted.org. Go to that website and check out what they do. Essentially, what you have is a ministry that is exclusively focused on helping the persecuted church, the persecuted Christians in the country of Nigeria, a country with over 200 million in terms of total population, and 50% of that identifies as Christian and the other 50% Muslim. And what's happening right now is the Christians are being overrun and killed and butchered by the Fulani tribe, the Muslims, and the government is doing nothing about it. Equipping the Persecuted steps in, provides food and housing, orphanages, schools, hospital supplies, and various different other assistance that is necessary for the church, for the people to survive after they've lost nearly everything. But in addition to that, Equipping the Persecuted goes into these communities before the attack, before the violence, and they provide training and assistance in security. They teach these people how to secure their communities and hopefully stop the persecution before it happens. If you want to make a tax-deductible gift today that makes a big difference in the life of the church, in the life of those Christians in Nigeria who are being killed for their faith by the tens of thousands, and the orphans and the widows that are left behind. If you want to make a difference in the church, in the lives of people who desperately need your help, go to equippingthepersecuted.org today. That's equippingthepersecuted, one word, .org. Back to today's show. The topic for today's program is the issue of, had to pull it up here on my screen, the issue of fatherlessness. And I'm titling this, America Needs Real Dads. And the context of today's show is the violence that seems to be rampant in the streets of not just Nigeria, but the United States of America right now. These mobs of teenagers that you see week after week, day after day in the news that are trolling the streets of Seattle, of Miami, of Memphis, of Washington, D.C., of Baltimore, of Minneapolis, name your city. These mobs, these gangs that are patrolling the streets of young teenage boys, some girls, but primarily teenage boys, that are beating those that stand in their way, sometimes without even any cause. You've seen the story of the man and the woman who were beaten outside the music festival, the concert, the jazz festival in Cincinnati a couple weeks ago. And then one of the most recent situations that has hit the news and gone nationwide in terms of viral coverage is the story of the young man who was beaten and left bloodied laying next to his car in Washington, D.C. I'm going to talk a little bit about those two stories and set the context for the problem of fatherlessness that we have in our country right now. So again, today's show is titled, America Needs Real Dads. So again, let me revisit the context, the platform for the dialogue and the critique that I'm offering you today. So last month, it was a woman named Holly who was punched in the face and left unconscious in downtown Cincinnati. Last week, it was the brutal beating of a 19-year-old man named Edward Corristine, who was protecting his girlfriend during an attempted carjacking and was left bloodied and shirtless in the streets of the District of Columbia. And you know that as the result of these stories, Donald Trump has federalized the police force in Washington, D.C., which he has the constitutional right to do. He has sent in the reserves. He has called up the National Guard. He has sent in FBI agents and others to assist in the policing of Washington, D.C. and stop this crime wave. He's being criticized for it, but if you lived there, wouldn't you be grateful for it? In fact, I've heard even some liberals say that there is a mess. There is a mess in Washington, D.C., and that they don't feel safe going outside their homes like after 5, 6, 7 p.m. in the evening and just walking the streets, walking their dog, going to the local coffee shop and whatnot. They don't feel safe doing that because of the gangs and the violence and the risk of their health and maybe even their own lives. So that's the context. So I want to ask this story. Why is this so commonplace? Why are these stories happening over and over again? Why is it even not shocking to hear of another beatdown in another city on another day in another situation where there were dozens of young men with a few girls, but primarily young men, roaming the streets and beating people up who are standing in their way? Why are hordes of young men from Seattle to San Diego, from Minneapolis to Miami, now taking over America's cities like a pack of rabid wolves? Whatever happened to chivalry and honor and moral restraint and self-control? Where did this culture of hate and vengeance and bloodlust come from? Now, in recent days, I've written an essay about this, and I'm using this essay as part of my commentary today. But I'm building my essay and my commentary off a very well-written piece, longer in nature than what I'm going to discuss today, but well worth your time to go to this website and read this. It's the website is titled Christ Over All, and the author of the essay that I'm using to formulate my argument today is Will Spencer. So go to Christ Over All and go to the essay on fatherlessness on that website, on that page that is written by Will Spencer. In this essay, Spencer is suggesting the answer to all of the questions that I've asked in terms of why is this happening? Why do you see it in Washington, D.C., Miami, Minneapolis, San Diego, Seattle? Why are you seeing this lawlessness, these gangs roaming unrestrained in our culture today? And why is masculinity this toxic? Now, I'm a critic of what the left calls toxic masculinity because when they speak of it, they're primarily talking about traditional masculinity, patriarchy, strong fathers, strong male figures in our culture and in our homes. That's what they're criticizing and mocking and making fun of. I reject that. In fact, I'm going to argue that's the exact opposite problem that we now have. The real problem is you don't have strong male figures in our culture, that male masculinity, patriarchy has been mocked and diminished and besmirched to the extent that you don't have anybody teaching these young men how to behave any longer, and chivalry and honor and moral restraint and self-control have all been thrown to the wind. It's all been lost because we've mocked healthy masculinity and called it poisonous and called it toxic. So Will Spencer, in his essay at the website Christ Over All, addresses this issue and tries to answer some of these questions that we're asking. Western culture is suffering right now, argues Spencer, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, because of a crisis of fatherlessness, the crisis of fatherhood. One of the greatest threats facing the United States right now is fatherless homes. Millions of boys have no male authority figure in the house to help raise them. In homes where the biological dad does exist, a hyper-feminized culture, more often than not, has left the father so emasculated that any vestiges of his positive masculinity are little but a quaint memory of days gone by. So we have a two-pronged problem right now. You have millions of boys that have no father figure in the home. They have no male authority figure helping to raise them and teach them chivalry and honor and how to behave properly. But even in the homes where the father still does exist, where there's a male authority figure, quote unquote, authority figure in the home, that dad has been so emasculated by our hyper-feminized culture that he's left essentially ineffective in terms of doing his job in raising up young men in the way they should go. The bottom line is this: America is suffering from what Mr. Spencer, Will Spencer, is calling in this essay of his, a father famine. Here are some of his quotes. For 3 generations and counting, Western men have experienced a crisis of fatherlessness, with the percentage of children living with single parents rising dramatically from 9% in the 60s to approximately 40% in 2023. And the Pew Research study now shows that single mothers lead these homes. 80% of these homes are led by single mothers. So I'm going to read that quote again so you can just get your arms wrapped around the statistics. For 3 generations, for 30 years or more, Western men have experienced a crisis of fatherlessness, with the percentage of children living with single parents rising from 9% in the 1960s to over 40% in 2023. And Pew Research shows that of these fatherless homes, single mothers are leading 80% of them. So even though the father is absent, there's not even a replacement figure. An uncle, a grandfather, a boyfriend even. There's no male figure in the home to help at all in 80% of these homes. So we have a mess on our hands. We're raising a generation of young men who don't know what it means to be a man because there is no man in their lives as they're growing up. That we've gone from 9% of our children being born in single parent homes to over 40% being born in single parent homes. And in those homes, 80% of them are now being led by single mothers. Men are abandoning their children. They're walking away. They're not doing their job. They're not doing their job. And as the result, we have young boys who are growing up and they're filling that void of fatherlessness, that father famine, to quote Will Spencer, with something else. Well, what is the something else? Let's go on and read a little bit more of what Spencer says. The fatherlessness, he says, combined with feminism's emasculation of men in general, has left America suffering the consequences of what Spencer calls a digital substitute dad, where for the first time in history, men can find substitute fathers on handheld devices where they can browse forums on social media and watch videos on YouTube or participate in men's chat groups. So Spencer is pointing out, yeah, men have abandoned these children. They've walked away from their responsibility and left these women to raise children on their own. We need to address that. But the boys are reaching out to find a father of some sort, and they find no literal father figure that they can model their lives after. So they seek the answer in the internet. They go and find digital dads on these men's chat rooms, these men's chat groups, and YouTube and social media and whatnot. This online world, says Spencer, now serves as a surrogate dad to tens of millions of boys. And it's known as the manosphere. Now, you may have heard that word before, but you need to pay attention to it right now. The manosphere. According to Spencer, the definition of the manosphere is this: it's a decentralized network for underfathered boys who discuss what it means to be a man, a place where moral training and responsible masculinity have been replaced by a Nietzschean pursuit of power, and that would be physical, financial, and sexual. So the manosphere, it's a digital dad, if you will, where the real father has been replaced by this chat room, this manosphere, this internet father, this virtual father of the manosphere, which is not healthy masculinity. It really is poisonous masculinity because it's following the rules of Nietzsche more than it is the rules of the Bible in the pursuit of power. And that's what it means to be a man. So if you can acquire more power physically, financially, and sexually, that's what the definition of manhood is in this manosphere. Spencer goes on to describe this dark digital dad by referring to what he calls the red pill's false promise. Now, the red pill is a reference to this capsule, this red capsule, the crimson capsule taken by Neo, Keanu Reeves, in the movie The Matrix. It's a drug that awakens Neo from the deception and the lies of the Matrix, revealing the truth of what is real. So if you haven't watched The Matrix, which almost all of you have, so I won't belabor this point. The red pill is a positive reference to a drug that awakens you to reality, awakens you from the lies of the Matrix, the cultural lie that you're living in. And we can all understand why people want to find out what's true and what's real, to wake up from the lies of our culture. So the answer in the manosphere is take the red pill. And by taking the red pill, the truth that boys learn to find, the truths boys learn in the manosphere, are that men only embody the nice guy archetype because they've been manipulated by their feminist mothers and feminist culture. So the manosphere teaches young boys to resent their moms, their feminist moms, and to hate the culture, the overly feminized culture, the culture that is called masculinity toxic. And these boys know that there's something wrong with calling manhood poisonous. So they look for answers. They take the manosphere's red pill and they learn to resent their manipulative moms and a manipulative culture. And they basically come to this conclusion that those who don't do what they're doing, those that don't take the red pill of the manosphere, are nothing but blue pill betas, effeminate suckers deprived of their masculine birthright. That's what they're being taught. And by contrast, men who enter the manosphere and take the red pill rather than, the blue pill and become blue pill betas, the red pill men grow in physical, financial, and sexual power. And the promise is that by shedding beta programming and becoming alphas, they can triumph over the feminist spirit of the age. That's what's going on in the manosphere. And Spencer goes on, and you need to read this essay of his. Like I said, it's much longer, but it's worth the time to read. Spencer goes on to point out that millions of young males are finding their substitute dad in the dark digital world of the internet, and that this is the breeding ground for extremism. Here's his quote. The magnitude of the bitterness toward devouring feminist mothers and abdicating boomer fathers is coming home to roost via the viral ideologies that are a far more pernicious threat than we realize, close quote. Spencer concludes by saying this, that the answer to these violent gangs and these wayward adolescent boys does not lie in more coddling, but rather in strong male role models. Strong male role models. Boys need faithful fathers who model biblical wisdom and self-discipline and moral character. And without this, they will search out the definition of their masculinity elsewhere and find it in the dark world of street gangs, thuggish mobs, and the dark rabbit hole of the manosphere. You hear what he's saying here? And he's absolutely right. If a boy can't find a real dad at home who shows him what real masculinity looks like and what his responsibility as a man is to women and to culture in general and to other people, if a boy can't find a real father to teach him honor, dignity, truth, virtue, chivalry, if he can't find a real dad to teach him these things, the vacuum is going to be filled by something. He'll seek out another dad. And he'll find that quote unquote dad in street gangs, these mobs of thugs that are roaming the streets right now that we're talking about as the context of today's show. Or he'll find it in the rabbit hole of the manosphere that teaches this nonsense about Nietzschean power, prowess, financial, physical, and sexual power. That's the definition of what it means to be a man in the world of the manosphere. So the bottom line is this. We've bred an entire generation of foolish and undisciplined young men who now think that their most prurient and violent instincts define what it means to be a man, what it means to be what manhood, what defines manhood, what it means to be a man. And the solution to this is not more single parent homes or affirming blue pill betas, whether they be men or women, but instead strong and present dads who are willing to do their God-given jobs and train up their children, their boys, their sons in the way they should go so that when they are old, they will not depart. Bottom line is something we all know instinctively. Young men need real dads, not more feminism and the consequent digital fathers of the manosphere, the digital fathers of porn and power and revenge. The famine of fatherlessness, the famine of fathers in our culture right now is the explanation for what you see in the daily news. When you see these young men beating up someone who stands in their way, a young man who's just defending his girlfriend from a carjacking, pushes his girl into the car, tells her to lock the door, and then this gang proceeds to beat him senseless and leave him bloodied in the street. Or the woman in Cincinnati who stepped into this beating of her husband or maybe it was her boyfriend at this music concert. And there was no sense of chivalry at all in the mob. They actually beat the woman unconscious and leave her laying in the streets. For all they knew, dead, as they laugh and celebrate. Why are they doing this? Because there's no dad. And because they seek out a father elsewhere when there is no father in the home. And they'll find the substitute dad. They'll find the surrogate father in gangs, in mobs, and in the manosphere. And none of these are positive. None of these are positive because the masculinity of those surrogate fathers is poisonous. It is toxic because it doesn't constrain the positive aspect of masculinity, which is to defend, which is to be the protector, which is to step in the way and help children and help women in the face of a culture that's abusing them, a misogynistic culture, a culture that thinks it's right to sacrifice children to its social goals and social ends. These young men know instinctively that all of that is wrong. They seek out the strength of masculinity in the manosphere, and it's defined by this red pill lie that if you want to be a real man, follow Nietzsche and pursue power, the physical power, the financial power, the sexual power that comes from taking the red pill. Because only by doing that can you crush the beta blue pill emasculated culture of radical feminism. It's not the answer, folks. The answer is in a biblical worldview where men take their responsibility to stay in the home and raise their children, and that we have government policies that encourage that. We have an educational system that teaches that, not one that mocks it and teaches the opposite. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion.